Hello, everyone, and welcome to this conversation presented by White House Custom Color.
I was telling my wife, she asked me, who are you interviewing today? And I was giving her the list of names, and I said your name, and she goes, "Oh, I love her."
Oh, well, I love her too.
So you have a big fan
Oh,
in my wife.
that's great. Well, I'm a huge fan of hers also. And yours.
As
I
am
love,
I.
I love your podcast. I've listened to so many of them.
Have you really?
Yeah.
Oh,
I listen to them on the way into work, and yeah, I love them.
I hear that a lot. People listen to podcasts on their drives and on their runs, when they run and when they drive. And I don't do a lot of either one of those, so I don't listen to podcasts very much.
Yeah. So you don't listen to a lot of podcasts, but do you listen to like other interviewers or?
All the time. I like, well, which is one of the reasons why I like doing this, because video is what I like to consume. So I'm a YouTube guy. I like listening to interviews on YouTube, but I pay attention a lot to the interviewer.
Yeah.
You know, like I study the way that people, not the people being interviewed. I study the way that interviewers work as much as I can. You know, that's my big thing.
Who are your faves?
Well, it's unfortunate I feel like this is the wrong guy to bring up when people ask me this question, but I used to really like watching Charlie Rose. I liked his style as an interviewer, and I liked the set. I liked everything they did there. It was just a black background. They're sitting at a table. And then the other guy that was big to me, and he just passed away, the guy that did all the interviews with the actors and actresses.
Inside the Actors Studio, yeah. James.
Yes. What's his last name?
James Lipton.
James Lipton. I am a huge fan.
Yeah.
Of James Lipton. He might be my favorite.
So subtle.
Yeah, you know, and it seemed like he always had kind of like a twinkle in his eye, and he was able to be really serious and then like break out and say something totally off the wall and unexpected, you know? Yeah. And it seemed like everybody just always really admired him and respected him, you know, like during the interviews, even like he'd have like the biggest star sitting up there on the stage with him.
So happy to be there.
Yes. Yes. Yeah.
No, I loved watching that too. I could never figure out like how to catch it, like exactly when it was on, but sometimes I just come across it.
I think I've only seen it replayed. I don't know if I ever saw it when it initially aired, but I've seen a lot of his, and he's probably my favorite. Yeah. Lipton. I forgot his last name. What's that?
What about Howard Stern?
You know what? I just talked to somebody a couple weeks ago about that, and I did list him as one of them. So Howard Stern, I think I get reluctant to say Howard Stern to a lot of people because a lot of my crowd would think that would mean that I was going to hell if they heard that I listened to Howard Stern. Yeah. But he is a master, and he's kind of like James Lipton in that the people on Howard Stern, like I'm always amazed. I watch whoever on Howard Stern, and it always seems like they're super excited to be there with him. Yeah,
definitely.
Like to them, like it's almost like these big stars are starstruck by being on Howard Stern.
Yeah, well, it's interesting because he does have that obnoxious side that's, of course, very offensive on many levels. But his interviews are genius.
Okay, I'll say this again about Howard Stern. As I'm watching interviews, a lot of times in my mind, I'm like, oh, you should ask him this, or why didn't you ask him this? And then sometimes I'm like, yeah, that's kind of a ballsy question, though. Howard Stern asks the question, but he does it in a way most of the time that's really respectful. Like he gets the people to answer. They'll answer his question because
how much money did you make for this movie?
Yeah. Come on, what'd you get paid for that? Come on, how much? Because I heard like 15 million. Was it 15 million? You know, and they're like, yeah, it was 15 million bucks.
Exactly.
Anyway, that's a great aside. But all that aside, I really wanted to hear a couple different things. How are you doing? We'll start there.
Okay.
How are you doing personally?
As a human being. Okay.
As a human being, how are you doing?
Well, I have a few different states of being at this time. So, I feel like, I'm in Canada. So
Right.
for us, it hit me probably the day our prime minister came out and made the announcement that everyone should stay home was the day that it really, hit me in terms of what this is going to mean for our family and our business. And honestly, my first response was surrender. Just, okay, this is happening. So logistically, what are my steps? How do I take care of my staff? How do I wrap things up with clients? What's my, what do I need to do to make people, feel, know what I'm doing as a business, the action steps. And then once the action steps were taken, I just decided to do what was required of me as a citizen and just, stay home.
How much of that, now I'm going to ask this, so here's a Howard Stern question. How much of that attitude, response, because I was talking to Allison Tyler Jones about this last week, and I think she mentioned you specifically and said, well, the Canadians were asked to be home and they were all just like, yeah, okay, we'll do that. And that's not what we see here. I mean, we see some of that, but we definitely see some of that, or some of the opposite of that. And what I'm wondering, when she said that, all jokes aside, how much of that attitude and response that you had do you really attribute to your Canadian heritage? How much of that is because you're Canadian?
Well, I don't know.
I mean, in all honesty, because of course we joke about, well, the prime minister says do this, and the Canadians are like, yeah, and the president of the United States says do this, and half of the people are like, oh yeah, and the other half are like, never.
Well, I think one thing I can say in response to that is our news is a lot less complicated than yours. Our news is largely coming from, statements made by health officials.
Yeah.
And by, our prime minister, makes very clear directives. And so that's very different. I've seen your news. I feel for my American friends. I can't even imagine how to take action as an American based on what you're watching on the news. Like, it's confusing. It's all over the place. It's, coming from, various different places that have nothing to do with health officials and their recommendations. So, and also just to speak to people following direction, I wouldn't say that, okay, I know Allison likes to think that once that prime minister went in front of the camera and said, Canadians, it's time to go home. Once that happened, that we all just went home and closed the door. That's not really what happened. And in some cases, that's still not what's happening. There is talk of, people being fined for not following directives. I mean, I live in a little, a fishing village, a half an hour outside of Vancouver.
Mm-hmm.
And it's usually a very busy, bustling place, and it's shut down and following it very closely. But there has been news coverage of people, in throngs at tourist attractions, and not that they're open, but I mean, pretty places around town that people still want to go. And so it's not a perfect situation, but I do think that we're just being given a very clear message. I think that's the difference.
Why do you think then, okay, take the Canadian piece out of it. For you personally, you said your first reaction, and I have not heard someone put it this way. This is the first time I've heard this term used. You said surrender. And for whatever reason, that comes across beautifully to me in this scenario, when a lot of times I would look at that word as okay, I give up, I'll do whatever, I give up. But it's not, you're not giving up. It's like you're obeying for the common good. Is that how you see it when you use that term?
Yeah, I think I see it as, part of it is just a sort of a pragmatic approach in terms of, okay, what action can I take? So here's the action I can take. I can also sit and hamster wheel and, figure out, what can I do this? Can I do that? What if I did this? Maybe I'll do that. But I realized, I think I started doing some of that before that day
Yeah.
that I told you about.
Yeah.
And I realized none of those things make any sense. I don't feel like that's a good use of my mental energy. I think it's going to make me a bit crazy if
Yeah.
I try, frantically chasing my tail to take action that may or may not be appropriate. And that's the other piece of it is, who am I to make decisions about trying to keep my high end fine art business open during during a time when maybe my energy is required elsewhere. Maybe I need to, how can I help my community? How can I help my clients on a human level?
Right. Now,
Yeah.
how can you help your clients spend more money on your high-end art?
Right.
So what?
It felt really like right away. It felt really clear to me. Like, okay, I'm not interested in selling anything right now. I had one outstanding view and order, which I held as a Zoom meeting the day after that announcement was made. She wanted to keep the appointment, so I thought, okay, we'll just wrap things up and I'll do that. Halfway through, she was a physician and she ran a fertility clinic. And halfway through our meeting, she's like, "Oh wait, I'm just getting a text from. It looks like I'm going to need to close my business for a non-essential service. Let's just finish this up." She wanted to just finish looking at the photos. I'm like, "Are you sure? Are you sure? Because I can wait." And then, anyway, now, not to say that I'm in a constant state of surrender. Like I'm not,
Right.
Zen, cross-legged on the couch. And
Right.
I've definitely had moments of, panic and what does this mean? And what will this mean for all of our future, not only in terms of health, but business? What's this going to be? It's one thing when you have, constant communication with 30, 40, 50 clients and you're sort of at different levels of working with them and you've got long kind of conversations going with them. Keeping things in momentum when you're in that state is one thing, but restarting momentum when you've ground to a halt. Like, I mean, my doors are closed and I have no client contact. I'm completely closed. So depending how long that happens, I have thought about that. The one thing that gets me a little bit freaked is when I think about, okay, how do you start things going again when it's all just at zero? There's usually a few balls in the air,
Well, are there no balls in the air?
Not in terms of client contact for me. The only thing I'm doing is, like I said, trying to be of service. Like I have a lot of clients that are physicians. I've reached out and asked if I can spread things on social media for them. I'm, checking in with people personally, but there's no business activity going. My frame shop is closed. White House is closed. there's no production. There's nothing going.
So then what do you look at on the other side? Like when you're kind of in the meantime right now, right? So nothing is happening in the meantime. But what does the other side look like if in 2 weeks everything opens up again?
Well, that could really get a hamster wheel going if you're not careful, right?
Yeah.
So I think if it was 2 weeks, I think we'd just pick up where we left off. So if it's 2 weeks, I'm not worried about it. I just call everyone back and, obviously reset the appointments that we've had to cancel for now. But so that is a no-brainer. If it's longer than 2 weeks, I think any number of things could happen. I want to get a read on where are people at in terms of picking up again on a service like this. Is it something that is going to be a hard sell? Do I need to pivot and change my offering? I don't know, and I'm not really focusing too much on that right now because we don't know what we don't know.
Yeah, that's the thing, right? Like we're in this time of limbo where nobody really knows what this is going to look like.
No.
What sort of What sort of advice do you have for anybody else, though? Considering we're, in a sense, we're all in this together. Everybody's in the same boat for the most part. What do you say to people?
Well, I mean, I have a lot of, I'm fortunate to have a lot of friends in the industry because of, the group that you and I have been a part of together, and also just, through the years. So, but most of them are American. So it is a little different,
Yeah.
but we do talk regularly and throw ideas around. I think the important thing is, as long as what I've been doing for myself, I don't know that I would offer this as advice, but I took care of what I could take care of, including, putting off my bills.
Yeah.
Like I spent a whole day sort of, calling around and figuring out what the deferment options are.
Right. What you could do.
Yeah. So took care of what I could take care of, and, handled my clients, and then got to a point where I just felt like, okay, I can't take any further action right now. So rather than exhaust myself by frantically trying to come up with 15 different contingency plans, I'm going to assume that this will end soon. And if it does, then I know where I stand. And if it doesn't, then I feel like I'll have more time to plan based on what we know is happening then.
That's a really good way to look at it. I don't know if I've thought about it that way.
Mm-hmm.
But if it ends soon, then great, I'm ready. And if it takes longer than that, then that just gives me more time to figure things out. Yeah.
Yeah, I don't think anything, I don't know how you feel, but I don't think anything's going to end overnight. So it's not like we'll get a news, bulletin that says, okay, everyone's going to be back in the morning, so get ready to open up shop. I don't think that's going to happen. I think there'll be more, I think there'll be a ramp up, just like there was a ramp up to this. I mean, I had time to flip out before we got the big state notification, so I did my flipping out then. But, in hindsight, when is flipping out ever a good idea?
Yeah, not very often.
It's not productive, honestly, Jed.
No, it's not. I mean,
it's not productive. It's not good for marriages.
No,
it's not good for kids. I know that. They don't like that.
Terrible for kids.
Yeah, and even internal flipping out, like that hamster wheeling I'm talking about, that doesn't really do any good either. Now, that being said, I'm not like some sort of spiritual guru that has this all under control. I've definitely flipped out. I've freaked out, and my friends have been there for me, and I hope I've been there for them too. I think we're all having moments of that. But in general, my plan is, once we start getting word, okay, it's looking like things are going to open in 10 days. It's looking like people may be able to, decrease their social distancing in the next week. Then that's time for me to say, okay, where are we at? Where are my clients at? Let me touch base with people. Am I getting a cold response when I touch base with people? I've got about, probably 30 clients right now that I would immediately contact if that, if things were to ramp up. What's the response? Are they getting right back to me? Are they anxious for us to work together again? Or are they like, okay, we've just got to sort some stuff out and put this off? Who knows? Because I think there's a great chance that all of this will end with a renewed gratitude for what matters.
I hope so.
Family and the people close to us. And, I'm sure you've heard many people talk about, their portraits being their most prized possessions, that would be the first thing they take if they had a fire in their home. So will that be underlined even more? And will we be in a position where, people, are more anxious than ever to use our service? I don't know. Or will they be like, all discretionary spending off the table until further notice? That goes for portraits, vacations, So I don't know. I really don't know.
I don't think anybody does. And it's like, this is just how things are right now. And I think that your point of not freaking out despite the reality of the situation is a huge point, especially when you bring up, marriage or relationships, and for me, especially kids, because I find myself getting anxious and nervous. Yeah. And then I look and I see those little eyes are looking right at me. and they're taking it in. And that is super convicting to me. I have caught myself more than once discovering their eyes on me, and they are watching just to see, because it's real easy for dad to say, hey, this is going to be fine, you guys. This is crazy and strange. Don't get me wrong, but we're all going to be okay. And then if 10 minutes later I'm going off the handle on something, I don't have any credibility with my 7-year-old.
Yeah.
They know. He's 7, but he knows. Dad can say that everything's cool, but if dad's not acting like everything's cool, then everything's probably not cool.
Right.
So your point hits home with me.
Yeah. I think we also need to remember that, like, if we think back to 2008, 2009, 2010, depending on where you live, when all that hit, that was a time of widespread fear and panic also.
Yeah.
And I think at that time, in my personal experience, I reached a point where I was needing to logistically look around and say, okay, so if I was to need to close the doors of my studio, what would that look like?
Yeah.
Like, logistically, what would that look like? Am I going to pack all this stuff up and put it in the garage? Or, I was really needing to figure it out. It was just happening. And at that time, I was very afraid.
Yeah.
And I did come to the realization that, okay, this fear isn't helping me. It's not helping me think clearly. It's not helping me make plans that are good for my business. It's making me spin, and I'm just not being productive. So actually at that time I did a lot of visualization, and I visualized prosperity. So that's what helped me through that period. I just,
like a meditation.
Yeah, literally dollar signs. Anytime I was sort of, kind of flipping out, I just sort of center myself and just envision dollar signs flowing into my studio through every door, through the phone, out of the computer, upstairs. Yeah, it was kind of calming, but it was also filling my brain with something that was reassuring. And I believe it helped me.
Right. I don't doubt it.
Yeah. So, but what I'm saying is the fear was not helping me. The fear was making me just not be productive. I wasn't able to make decisions. I was second guessing my ideas. It wasn't useful. So I'm trying to remember that now. And, other times in life you see that too, when you're, needing to be effective and you can't because you're so caught up with what if this happens, what if that happens. It doesn't help me to feel that way and think that way, even if it overcomes me in spite of myself sometimes. But I do try and just, take a step back and remember, like, fear is not my friend. It's not helpful.
I love that. Fear is not our friend. I'll wrap it up on that. I want to stop there. Fear's not our friend. Thank you for your time and your words of wisdom. They are helpful. See, now you got me thinking about how I'm going to act around my kids more and more, because that's such a big deal for me. My wife too, of course, but we're all here, like, in this place. It's been, I think we're on day 12 maybe now for us. We started relatively early. Because we just thought, why not be safe rather than sorry type of thing. And that was like 2 days after I was like, this is nothing.
Oh yeah. I know Allison was talking about, different people realizing it at different times. And all of us has said, this is just a flu. Everyone has said that at some point. It's just, yeah.
Yeah. So, well, here we are. You know what? Thank you for this. And at some point I want to have you on the podcast too. So keep that in mind. On the other side of this, we will do that. In the meantime, stay not afraid.
Thanks, Jen. Have a great day.
Thank you. You too.